There we go. I think it should be fine. And let me start there. Okay, so, so there. And the volume is also fine. I've got a neighbor that started a building project. And I convinced him to keep quiet with his building between 10:30 and 11. That's the way it goes. I don't think it's too loud, so it's okay. Well, we'll go from there. So let's talk about this topic. I wanted to talk about more about trends, but somebody asked me to talk about modal split. So I am going to spend a little bit of time on that, because as we go into the future, that is going to become quite important, because more and more people will be participating in this market. And I would like us to really understand this. So I'm going to take that, talk about the current freight landscape, and from that, about modal split, say something about rail strategy and where we are going right now. In terms of the current freight landscape, we've updated that logistics cost slide that the professor has shared. We've got it updated to 2020 at the moment. I'll share it later with everybody. But on the demand side currently, yes, we are probably one of the most spatially challenged countries in the world. I've said it to everybody often before. Our ton-kilometer demand is 3 times the global average. It just means as an input, we require much more ton-kilometers to keep our economy going, and it is a problem. And then the other side of it, there's no demand management, such as we have for electricity. Nobody is asking you to switch off the lights. Nobody is asking you every evening to do things like don't demand unnecessary delivery speed, don't go for smaller consignments. We have too much choice in this economy, and all of that causes logistics, and it causes demand of freight. On the supply side, poor modal choice. I can give you a figure there. I think of the 12 billion road freight kilometers that we currently have, about 3 billion of them is unnecessary and should be on rail. Now, I've been attacked for this, saying this for the last 25 years. I'm still saying it. And I'm not advocating for TFR. I'm advocating for the rail, for the mode. So 3 is too much, 25% is what it should be less at the moment. The second thing that comes from that, even if you take the whole rail question out of the equation, we probably spend 3.6 billion road freight kilometers unnecessary. That's waiting times at depots. That is empty haul. That is missing a slot and you have to go back to your depot because you couldn't offload. Loads are not complete, etc. So that's also missing. And then if you get to the operations, those road kilometers that is unavoidable, is probably a 10% emission overspend. That is because of tractors being old, driving behavior, and enforcement, etc. So this is serious challenges that we have at the moment. If you look at the Logistics Performance Index, and you go back the last decade, we used to be the best of BRICS. We used to be. But we're the only country of the BRICS countries that over the last decade has declined in our performance. And then where we used to be the best, China has overtaken us in the last measurement. If you look at modal split, now, I desperately need to talk to you about this. So I've spoken to this forum before. There's a few things that I want to say about strategy and going forward that I think is important. But I think if you take away from this a discussion about modal shift, it would be very, very heartening to me. And the reason is segmentation is difficult. This is not like buying soap. It's just not like going to the store and there's X amount of soap available in the store. And because there's X amount of available, Lever Brothers sell so much and so much and so. This is a very, very difficult concept. And people don't want to spend the energy to get their head around it. People just don't want to do it. And on top of that, the data is very scarce. It is never, more or less never collected completely, and I'll talk about that. And there's some other fundamentals that we need to consider. Then the other thing is I'm sorry to say this, as I'm getting older, I'm getting more bold and I'm getting less concerned of maybe saving something that people will find offensive. People look for easy to quote answers. Some important politician will call me and say, what is the rail market share? There is no easy answer. It is as simple as that. People want this easy answer because then they create the illusion that they can manage this environment. Most of the answers is gibberish. You tell me rail market share is 10%. Well, what does it mean? What should it be? Should it be 100%? Should it be 20%? Should it be 25%? And what did you measure when you measured that 25% or 10% or whatever? And then often the answers create more confusion because of the reasons that I've just said. I think in future, regulatory people and operators need to understand this measurement much better. So I'm going to spend some time. I'll use the example of a supply side, and I'll use the example of a demand side. And I will say to you that I'll give you an example. For instance, I thought about it this morning of Weet-Bix. Weet-Bix is produced in Atlantis, close to where I live, here in Durbanville, by Bacomo, and Bacomo is owned by Pioneer, and Pioneer these days by PepsiCo, and it's produced there. And if they were able to ship it directly from there to the place, to the retailer where you buy it, that would be the flow. You can also import Weet-Bix. If you don't know it, you can buy it. It's called shredded wheat in America and the UK. If you import it, it's going to cost you about 1,000 Rand for half a kilo or a kilo. If you want to be so stupid, and if you can deliver it directly from the harbor to consumption, that's what the flow would look like. If you produce it and you can directly ship it, that's what the flow would look like. Now, this demand and supply that I'm talking about is 838 million tons in South Africa. That is how much we either import and produce or either export and consume. Very simple figure. It includes about 250 million tons of coal, just to give you an idea of how confusing it could become. And the rail market share that's involved in any one of these flows is about 25% in this country. That is just roughly what it is. And it hasn't changed, by the way. And we have to ask ourselves, why did it change? Why did it didn't change? There's a lot of reasons. One of them is most flows that we have in this country doesn't work the way that I've just said. Some of the big flows, like for instance, iron ore export or coal export or moving domestic mining from domestic mining facilities to production facilities, they do work like that. Many flows work like that. That Weet-Bix that you've produced will go to a warehouse, maybe somewhere in Brackenfell, or go far away to a warehouse in Germiston, where it gets distributed. Imports is the same. You don't take imports directly from the quayside to the consumer. It will go first, have a first flow towards the warehouse, maybe two flows, to a local warehouse and then to a faraway warehouse, and therefore it will be distributed and therefore it will be exported. This means that things are shipped more than once. And if you remember, 838 million tons get shipped. About 1.6 billion tons in South Africa that get shipped in this country. This is different. The rail market share of this is 16% at the moment. It was 23% in 2011. It declined a lot. It declined a lot because railways' insertion into South Africa's supply chains has declined. Its participation in logistics has declined. And that's why that has declined, if you want to understand that. But then this is ton ship. This is ton ship. If you go to ton kilometers, and everybody here knows this, but I have to repeat it. If you ship 100 kilometers, 1 ton over 100 kilometers, you have 100 ton kilometers. But if you shift 10 tons over 10 kilometers, you have the same. So clearly, if you just talk about ton ship, you have the wrong measure of transport activity. You have to add it all together in ton kilometers, which for South Africa is 384 billion ton kilometers. And the rail market share for this has increased over the last decade. Once again, that sounds counterintuitive. It does not sound correct to say that. And you know all the reasons why. Because the railway, those that the Prof has shown, those growth in the railway volumes is all export coal and iron ore. It doesn't really mean that the railway has grown. It actually has declined. And I will show you why I say that. So the reason why it's declined is because all of that's gone to those export lines that you can see on this map. Very little has gone towards the general freight business, as the railway used to call it. The blue here is the export lines. It should be taken out. It's nonsensical to include it. And I also have a future view for this. And if you exclude this, then the railway, then the total in South Africa is 193 billion ton kilometers. And here it's declined for the railway from 18% by 14 to 14%. At the same time, you have this nonsensical figure of, if you think about this, that a lot of the smaller volumes should not be on rail. That's what I always been told. One way of looking at it is to look at, sorry, it's this one. This is 14%. One way of looking at it is to exclude all the corridors. I mean the non-corridor freight. Let's just look at corridor freight. Now, the moment you've done that, you have about 111 billion kilometers in South Africa. And of that, the railway market share has declined from 12% to 6%, if you just talk about corridor freight. Once again, because of the decline in the general freight business of the railway that I'm talking about, even though the ton kilometers has increased. So you can also look at it in terms of what people pay for freight. Now, what people pay for freight could either be insourced. This means this is, if you take that Wheatpix example, this is a Pioneer or Bacomo, move their own Wheatpix, they don't pay anybody for it, then it's insourced. We measure that. It was 56% of all freight in 2011. It's now 49% of all freight. Now, the reason why that's important, it's better to outsource freight for the economy because then you get better balance, get better efficiency. The railways cost participation in freight in South Africa hasn't changed over the last few years. But if you look at this, because we outsource more, if you take the percentage of outsourced freight, it actually has declined from 32% to 27%, for the reason that operators in South Africa has been able to increase the market by taking away people's insourced freight. Now, Statistics South Africa only measures the red portion, therefore we can never get a perfect answer for this. Market share based on outsourced transport can easily change by the market choosing to outsource more freight. It is as simple as that. So how do you do this? It requires segmentation. You have no other choice. It is not as simple as just counting corridors. You should base it on rail-friendly freight. So going forward, as we get more rail freight operators in this country, we will start looking at things that we call the density of terminals. So if you ship more things in the country all together from the same place, it makes it easier for the rail to participate. If density of lines, if a lot of freight is on the same line, then obviously it will make it more easier for rail. If the commodity is uniform, which makes it easy to load, like containers, like coal, like iron ore, it makes it better for rail. And then distance plays a role, and I'll explain about distance. And it's not true that valuable freight cannot go on rail. One should always do the trade-off, as we know in logistics, between the value of the commodity, because of the commodity has got a certain value. It depends on to the extent to which rail will delay it. And often when we do this trade-off, for many commodities, it is clear that even a delay of a few days will still make it more profitable to use a cheaper service. And then in terms of distance, it is also not true that short distance freight is not rail friendly. If all of those things that I've mentioned, terminal density, product uniformity, etc., is met perfectly, then you can move over 100 kilometers, you can move coal that from a mine to a power station, and it will still be rail friendly if you meet all of those other conditions. So what do? We say you get freight from a mine or from the silos in the towns, in the rural areas. We either export it or we move it, let's say, for instance, to a miller. And then certain portions of this could be rail friendly and also imported. We import about 2 million tons of wheat through Durban. If we have a concentrated flow, it could be rail friendly, but a lot of it isn't because it comes from various disparate places. Mining is the same. You can run unit trains from places like, for instance, Sishen to Newcastle to Vanderbijl with a lot of iron ore in it, then it becomes rail friendly. But if it becomes pieces and little bits here and there, then it isn't. From intermediate manufacturing, we have what we call siding to siding traffic. So for instance, if you have steel coils that goes from Vanderbijl to Volkswagen and Uitenhage, you can run from the one siding a train to the other siding. It could be a block train and it will be rail friendly. If not, then you must measure that and say it's not rail friendly. And finished palletized goods and other final manufacturing stuff, we can run it through a domestic intermodal solution, which could either be containers or it could be swap bodies, anything like that. And that we can also measure. And it's separate, and it's a separate type of technology that you need. So in summary, it's this. It's either bulk agricultural stuff that we run from silos. It's either export minerals. It's domestic flows, which needs a specific type of solution. Intermediate manufacturing, which is siding to siding, and then finished palletized goods in containers or other intermodal technologies. From that, we can measure what rail market share should be. So 30% of all palletized things should be on rail for the reasons that I've mentioned, and more or less nothing is. About 30% of intermediate manufacturing should be on rail. About more than just over 10% is east. The other is a gap. Domestic mining that goes mostly over our rural roads. There's about 1/3 that is missing that should be on rail. And there's about 10% of rural freight that should be there. There's only about 3%. And then there's even a gap on export mining. So rail has a 78% market share of rail-friendly ton kilometers. Now, this is not a high figure. This is an extremely low figure. 65% of rail-friendly tons. It means 1/3 of the tasks that our railway should do is not being done. This figure should be 100%. And this, for me, becomes a measurable figure. And I can show it to you in a picture. The blue is what it should be. The red is what it is currently. And all of those are the things that destroys our rural roads. Those are the things that takes the demand on our corridors too high, etc., etc. It also means that the current 18 billion ton kilometers on our system that should be, that is on rail at the moment, it should be 47 billion ton kilometers. And we go forecast. It should be 77 by 2050 if this country wants to succeed, which means that our current railway must quadruple. So somehow, out of the system, we need to bleed a 4 times bigger railway than we currently have 30 years into the future. It is as simple as that. So what's the result of this? Export lines, well, if you lose 11 billion ton kilometers, it's simple. Quite a few economists talked about it recently. You just hamper economic growth. Those domestic mineral freight that's missing, the 9 billion ton kilometers, is destroying our rural roads. It's as simple as that. The intermediate manufacturing is putting too much stress on our corridors. And the same with the domestic intermodal that's missing. Too much stress on our corridors, which means that we need to throw too much money to Sunrail. Now, Sunrail is highly efficient and work well, but some of this money should go to a railway that works well. It is as simple as that. And then some of the stress on the rural roads is also the 4 billion missing ton kilometers agriculturally. Added to this is the whole discussion about density. Now, the small little graph that you see there is million ton kilometers per route kilometer. The improvement that you see is over the last 60 or 70 years. The black is America, the orange is South Africa. I've indexed this and we've actually done quite well. So we have densified our rail network to the same extent that the Americans has done it. We've actually beaten them over the last few years because of our big increase in export freight. Now, the blue and the red is the export freight. The green is our general freight business, which is dying. This is railway cancer. If you can't densify lines, you have railway cancer. It's as simple as that. And in fact, no railway in the world can survive like this. No railway in the world can survive this. South Africa cannot afford a 20-kilometer route, 20,000 kilometer route network. If you're looking at this little graph over here, we have completely declined. We've actually moved backwards. We're not moving forward, we're moving backwards in terms of using this. Our network has to become smaller. It is as simple as that. Our network has to become smaller, otherwise we cannot win. So we have to do something to make this network smaller. And I have to talk about that. If you're looking at this and you take that out and you compare this to the Americans, then we have actually a declining and dying general freight business in South Africa, which you cannot afford. There's two ways to fix it. The one is to improve service levels, which will attract more ton kilometers. The other one is just to make the network smaller, which also needs to be done. But there is no other way of working around it. So if you're looking at that, then you can start and ask about a current railway strategy. So we've had interviews with people in this country. I'm just trying to draw my wife's attention so that you can try and stop this building project, which is getting worse now. It is we interviewed people in South Africa, and what we found with people in South Africa is despondency. Just amazing, big, huge despondency. The second thing that we found is the gap today is, as we forecasted 10 years ago, is a supply gap. What I mean with a supply gap is there is demand for rail. There's no doubt about it. A working, efficient railway has a place in South Africa, but we don't have the the capacity to actually to supply this. So it's a supply gap. People understand about vandalism and things like that. But I also say if they engage with the railway, they would work hard to build a relationship. And then when I want to talk to that person again, that person is missing. That person is missing. But in spite of all of this, people still want to work with rail. It is as simple as that. They still want to work with rail. LSP want to work with rail. People want to make this railway succeed. It is as simple as that. So what I call it, we're now at the last throw of the dice. We've got new regulation in place. We have third export axis that start. Over the next 5 years, we need to fix this. If not, this country will be in serious trouble. It is as simple as that, if you take that away. So what is our key strategic objectives? Those missing ton kilometers we need to get. We just need to get it on the rail as fast as possible. There is a business case for it, but it's a funding issue. And we have to ask ourselves, how will we make the railway 4 times bigger by the year 2050? What is the things that we need to do to make it 4 times bigger? And that's what I want to talk to you about. Now, we did a deal sheet. When I worked for Arthur Anderson for a few years, we always talked about the deal sheet. Is there a deal sheet for this? And we've calculated. We said, well, you can get about 3 billion if you can get that 11 billion. This is per annum. Those missing general freight business should at current tariffs give us 18 billion rand in this country. I think it probably needs to be 20% discounted. That's about how much the railway loses at the moment on that, which will give you an extra 16 billion. And then the export minerals and general freight added together to give you 19 billion. And then you'll have an increase in density. So even at the current cost structure and an increase in density, which means you move more things over the same line, you should get only 7 billion additional cost. This is a net positive business case for 12 billion. And this is my calculation of what is on the table for the whole of South Africa if we can make the railway work. It's a 12 billion per annum income that is available. Anybody that wants to enter this market, that is basically what's available. But it requires 3 things. We need to invest, which Transnet hasn't got the money. We have to improve the asset utilization, which selling the slots, using the slots, the utilization of the current Transnet assets, etc. as well. And we have to improve service levels. And we have to ask ourselves how we're going to do that. And there we've got some new initiatives. And this is a strategic focus of the whole country. Everybody needs to now get on board. It's not only the TFR, it's not only the DOT. There is an investment case for this. But somehow we have to structure this to make this work and then get money to do it. And it presupposes a certain achievement of these objectives of we need to get more slots on the same infrastructure, not only selling a few. We need to fill all the slots. And it needs to be predictably delivered, efficiently serviced, and sold into the market. We've been working on this. We talk about vertical separation often, which talks about somebody else's train over the same network. We also require horizontal separation. And what I mean with this is between low and high density lines. We have to solve this problem with all the branch lines. It's putting a massive burden on the railway in terms of cost, and some of it's just unnecessary. And then between terminals and the railway, which is privatized terminals, which we really have to get in and spend more time to get it working. And then also in terms of some of the solutions we have in South Africa, which is hook and haul, which is between the railway, the wagons and the locomotives, which does not even have to belong to Transnet. So this is basically the structure that we're working towards. Where will the money come from? The systemic money, which is in terms of the terminals, it's currently owned by TFR and some of them by the ports. That could eventually be owned by LSPs in terms of money. The locomotives is owned by TFR. It can also eventually become outsourced to other locomotive companies. And then the government needs to play a role in terms of infrastructure. The low density lines must be closed, or government must directly subsidize every line if they want to keep it open, and there's sometimes reasons to do it. The high density lines, we need the same infrastructure subsidy that SANRAL gets. Needs to be matched. So that means that government needs to supply this infrastructure, and we have to find a tax-based regime to pay for it. And that will solve a lot of problems. And the same as cross-subsidization of passenger freight to road freight that we have at the moment. We know that the truck pays about 10 times for access that the car pays, but it causes much more damage than that. These things need to be solved in order to solve this from a funding perspective. So this drive, I call it a drive for success these days. I call it pan-rail. What I mean with pan-rail, it's beyond the railway and it's beyond TFR. We have a new rail policy now. It seems like it has succeeded. It has been accepted or passed by the cabinet a few weeks ago. And it opens the door for us to do this more sustainable evidence-based planning on a much wider front. We have open access that's now starting with dominant operator. Financial separation should be done. The next move will be to have full open access. Currently, the railway cherry picks a bit and sells certain slots. We have to have all slots available that the railway doesn't fill themselves. It is as simple as that. And this involves the broader community of people who is involved. So there's some challenges ahead of us. We need to effectively get this low density, high density split, sensible infrastructure provision, and charges for this. There's going to be, if I talk about competitive slot pricing, there's going to be a fight in the next few years about what those slots actually should cost. And especially a foot stewards slot cannot have a high price. It's just as simple as that. The moment you want to charge more, you have to guarantee what you ask for, which I call real open access. So what does the future of rail look like? This is current freight flows all through the world, what we currently have. We have 4 clusters, which is America and Europe, India and China, a little bit in Southern Africa. I mentioned this because the failure of Europe to do modal shift, people have a lot to say about, but it's short distance freight where a road is very well established and available. But in other 3 clusters, America has been highly successful, we know that, and we will make India and China more successful because of long distances, because of good rail economics, it needs to work. Interestingly enough, we see Cape Core. If you look at this graph, this picture just shows changes. This is new freight in the world. And that is telling because if you look at the International Transport Forum analysis of this, then you see that Cape Core actually stands out. Now, I, for myself, believe that we have 2 very important corridors in this country. The one is the Natal corridor. It is important. It's our import corridor. 25% of all freight on that corridor is import and export. But the actual fundamental rail-friendly economy, rail-economy-friendly corridor in South Africa is Cape Core. And we need to solve this. It is absolutely ridiculous to move so much freight on the road for 1,400 kilometers. There are solutions, but for 25 years, 28 years, we've been talking about the solution, so we're just not getting there, which is ridiculous in this country. So we're looking at global freight. We've participated in the Future of Rail publication. People need to read it. It was published by the International Energy Agency a few years ago. This research tells us that worldwide, in order for the world to succeed, railway freight has to double. And in South Africa, as I say, general freight needs to quadruple. It's as simple as that. The future rail freight will have to be seamlessly inserted in the supply chain. The way to do this is what I've said earlier, is to make the supply chain work, and railway is part of it. It does not compete with anything there. It is part of the supply chain. We really need to get this done if you're looking at it. And if I'm looking at the forecast that we have for the world, there will be a modal shift towards rail in most countries for rail-friendly freight, as I've defined it. The other thing that the International Energy Agency and the International Transport Forum is concerned about is the fact about reshoring. Because reshoring is causing maritime freight to shift to overland freight. And if we don't have guided transport, then we are going to have big problems in this world. A world without mass guided transport will be a failed world. The same is true for South Africa. This is my last slide. And the point I want to make here, all of the scenarios that we do say that this is completely intertwined with the future of South Africa. A failed railway now means a failed country. We look 30 years into the future. We don't actually have another way of competing globally, of low-cost transfers in our country, on our corridors. There is no other future for us than a successful railway. So I believe that the things that we're doing now just have to succeed. The Deputy President of Nigeria says an active and vibrant railway system confers many benefits on society. I like reading about Albert Einstein often. I don't know if many people know it, but the first worst words of his relativity theory, if you go and read the original text, says, let us imagine ourselves transferred to our old friend, the railway carriage. And this is the old friend that I hope that we will return to in this country. Thank you.
Thank you so much.